Hello and welcome to this episode of Viking.TV. I'm taking you to India this time around, and I'm doing so in the company of two of my colleagues. We were there a few weeks ago, and this is all in preparation of the 2027 launch of our newest product, Wonders of India. It's essentially a river cruise in combination with a visit to the Golden Triangle, the cities of Delhi, Agra, and Jaipur. You will find that as I'm traveling with my colleagues, we had to do things a little bit differently. For starters, there's not a ship on the Brahmaputra yet. So we had to use a small boat from the Indian Geographical Survey. And there are some other differences. The sequence had to be a little adjusted. You will find that the Qutb Minar, which is this tall minaret just on the outskirts of Delhi, will be visited on our itinerary on the very last day. We're doing it here, or I did it here with my colleagues very early on. So don't be irritated by that. You will find some slides that will tell you exactly where we are, where I am with my colleagues in the journey as we have mapped it out for you and as we have put it on sale already. Here we go. After an uneventful flight, my longtime coworker Klaus and I touched down in Delhi. We checked into the Taj Mahal hotel there, and as we did, received the traditional greeting with a jasmine flower mala and a bindi, a third eye between the eyebrows as a token of hospitality. Soon after, we went to bed to up and at 'em the next morning, ready to tackle the sights of Delhi. Early the next day, we were joined by Harald, the third member of our party of explorers. I dove straight into Indian cuisine the next morning. Of course, the Taj Hotel has an international breakfast buffet with eggs, bacon, fruit, oatmeal, even if they call it porridge here, just like in the UK. But I went for a dosa, a thin pancake with chutney, some fresh cheese, and some spicy sambar. Not long after, we were on the road. Our first stop was at a monument for a man who around the world is so well known that you need only the smallest of hints to understand who this memorial was for. Mahatma Gandhi, the great soul, was cremated here at Rajghat, and the memorial is kept very simple, in keeping with the life Gandhi chose to lead. We were there very early in the morning to beat the heat and the crowds, and while it was already getting quite toasty, we did not see very many people here. We were soon off to a somewhat indulgent adventure. As a man with Dutch roots, I winced at the prospect that someone else was going to do the pedaling while I sat back and relaxed. But it did give me a chance to have a good look around, and we made our way along Jawaharlal Nehru Road, past the Delhi Gate, into the worn of Old Delhi streets. And even though the pedicabs don't move all that fast, there's so much going on in these narrow lanes and alleys that it is hard to keep up with everything there is to see. So in the end, I was grateful that I could sit back and watch the scenery without having to navigate traffic. We stopped at the Jama Mosque, one of the largest in India. From the mid-1600s, this was the most important mosque in India, which was ruled by the Mughal emperors. Shah Jahan the Magnificent, the fifth Mughal emperor, is probably best remembered for the Taj Mahal, the tomb in Agra, which he built for his late wife. But the Jama Masjid was also finished during his reign, as well as the nearby Red Fort. Because it tends to be warm in Delhi, the people who planned the mosque created a huge courtyard, but not a lot of covered praying space. What little there is covered with magnificent domes. The mosque sits on a plateau, and you can see the Red Fort across Old Delhi from here. Our mad dash through Old Delhi continued. Mad not because of the rather modest speed of our drivers, but because of the speed with which each image was followed by the next. We were there on a quiet day, and we were still early, but it isn't hard to imagine what it's like in the area when all the businesses are going full blast. People are getting ready to sell all sorts of products, and they're using all kinds of modes of transportation. And everywhere you look, there are the carts selling fresh sugarcane juice. Don't expect something that is syrupy sweet with sugarcane juice. It has a sweetness, but it is fresh with a good dash of an almost grassy flavor. After we left the pedicats, we traveled to Humayun's tomb, a monument to the second Mughal emperor, completed in 1558. It was the first time that the typical red sandstone one sees in so many of India's great monuments was used to create something so large. The architects were from Persia, Humayun had received quite a bit of help from the Persians in a nasty succession battle for the Mughal throne, and ever since there are clear links to Persia in the architectural style of Mughal India. Humayun's tomb is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, not least because it became a model of sorts for so many other important buildings in India. It was also one of the first garden tombs. Subsequent generations of Mughal emperors and nobles had many more of them built. We got our first taste of India's diverse bird life here, with an Indian night heron and a red-naped ibis. Also on the grounds is a much smaller but very elegant tomb known as Barber's Tomb. Humayun's father was named Barber, but the much better story is that the tomb is dedicated to the emperor's hairstylist. A man who could hold a knife to the emperor's throat was certainly important enough to warrant his own tomb. And really no one knows who's buried under the nearby Blue Dome in the park. Nila Gumbat is not an exotic name of the person buried there. The words simply mean Blue Dome. Another interesting tomb that's part of the complex is the monument to Isa Khan, who, interesting detail, was a nobleman at the court of Sher Shah Suri. The latter was the man who made Humayun's life miserable for almost 2 decades, taking over the empire at some point. But apparently that did not prompt Humayun to have the man's grave monument raised. Lunch was next, and while the food was superb, what caught my eye was the basin filled with gerberas in yellow, white, and orange. Chances that such a color arrangement is a bit random in India are very slim, because Indians know their colors and their meaning. Yellow is for wisdom, learning, and prosperity, while white means purity and peace. Orange finally is associated with spirituality and courage. After lunch, we went to visit a gurdwara, a place where people from the Sikh faith come together to worship, be together, and eat. Vendors here sell food that may be eaten or used as an offering. Covering your head is customary, and for your socks and shoes, you receive a metal token so you can pick them up after your visit. A large space in every gurdwara is dedicated to the kitchen and the dining area. Visitors, irrespective of their religion, are fed here for free, and preparing, cooking, serving, and cleaning are all services for which any devout Sikh can be called on. We were given a peek behind the scenes that allowed us to marvel at the efficiency with which the traditional food staples are prepared and cooked here. We ended the afternoon at the Qutb Minar complex, over which towers one of the tallest minarets you'll likely ever to see. It was completed more than 800 years ago, and it measures 238 feet. That's 72 meters. To get to the top, which really isn't an option, the tower is close to the public, one would need to climb 400 steps. The ruins surrounding Qutb Minar date back to well before the minaret was built. You can tell by some of the decorations carved in the red stone because there are human figures, which you don't usually find in Islamic decorative art. Those may show flowers or calligraphy, but not people. The entire complex was built on the site of a Hindu temple, and the walls here, in a way, tell a turbulent story of rise and fall and of conquest and ambition. After we said goodbye to Delhi, we traveled to Agra. And probably the biggest surprise for all three of us was that doing so involved a very nice modern highway that got us there in a minimum of time. You would imagine perhaps that it's a little difficult to travel there, but large coaches bring you from A to B without any issue and as quickly and as comfortably as you would expect it in any country in Western Europe. So that was a very nice surprise for us. We traveled to a suburb of Agra, where we had a conversation with a lawyer from Agra, his wife, and his mother-in-law. We admired their house in a part of town originally home to the British colonial officers. High ceilings and a clever air conditioning system of sorts kept the house cool despite the toasty weather outside. After we said our goodbyes, we went to see the Taj Mahal, the most recognizable monument in India. The tomb is popular with foreign visitors and Indians alike, and the first photo op is the main gate to the garden around the mausoleum. But even before you get to the main gate, visitors here, as in other places from here to Kathmandu, are warned to steer clear of Hanuman's little cousins. Hanuman is the monkey-faced Hindu deity, and his cousins are the ubiquitous rhesus macaques, and they are found wherever large numbers of people congregate. Anyone unwise enough to engage with them will find that they're a rather nasty bunch that will steal from you whatever they can and then run away to a safe distance to inspect their loot. As the sign says, these monkey are no good. Located on the banks of the Yamuna River, this masterpiece of symmetry was completed in 1653 for Mumtaz Mahal, the favorite wife of Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan. She died in childbirth after giving birth to a daughter, her 14th child. Shah Jahan is also entombed here, along with other members of the family. No expenses were spared during construction. Craftsmen from Syria, Persia, Bukhara, and Italy were employed to create this outstanding marble monument. The walls are decorated with bas-relief carvings and inlay work for which a wide range of gemstones were used. Over the centuries, it's seen whole empires rise and fall, and twice in the 20th century, the dome was covered in scaffolding to make it less visible during wartime. The Taj Mahal is actually a massive building, something you don't notice in the pictures. It doesn't make it any less pleasing to the eye because all the detail is of such richness, but it does surprise a bit. Flanking the mausoleum on both sides are two virtually identical red sandstone buildings with marble domes and intricate marble and semi-precious stone inlay decorations. One is a functioning mosque, the other is the Jawab, and that word means something like answer. In other words, its main function is to look pretty and symmetrical. In the days of the emperors, the building was used to house important guests. The gardens and all other supporting structures are just as carefully placed, and altogether it really makes for a pretty much perfect ensemble. The next morning we were up at the crack of dawn to see the Taj Mahal again, this time from across the Yamuna River with the rising sun. The river is always teeming with birds, black-headed ibis, red-wattled lapwing, kites, and waders of all kinds. And as the sun begins to rise, the Taj goes from dull gray to ivory and then pale orange. Not far from the viewpoint is the mausoleum of the grandfather of Mumtaz Mahal, who is buried in the Taj. It is often seen as a draft for its larger neighbor. It was completed just 3 years before the start of the Taj Mahal, and it was the first time such a building was mainly done in marble instead of the red sandstone that was more commonly used. The tomb of Itimat-ud-Dawla doesn't attract anywhere near as many visitors as the Taj Mahal, and that's certainly a part of its charm. Early in the morning, it provides a relatively quiet and cool experience. Itimat-ud-Dawla's tomb is small enough to allow studying all of the intricate decorative stonework much more closely than at the Taj, and it makes the entire experience different. There it is the grandeur and the vision of the architects that make it such an impressive sight. Here you can see the craftsmanship, the attention to detail, and the painstaking precision of the people who put it together. The inlay work, the stone carving, and the painting, especially in the part of the building that houses the actual tomb, is absolutely exquisite. It makes the entire building look like it is made out of subtly colored lace. Pollution, the hot, humid climate, and the time have taken their toll on the walls and ceilings, but there are encouraging discussions about the tomb's gradual, careful restorations. After a few earlier attempts did more damage than good, today's modern technology allows for a more gentle approach. After our visit at Itimat-ud-Dawla's tomb, we returned to the quiet morning traffic to the other side of the Yamuna River to Agra's fort, a walled city within a city perched atop of a promontory that overlooks the Yamuna River's banks and, depending on where you stand, the Taj Mahal. The entrance to the fort is, even in the 21st century, quite intimidating. It is not hard to imagine defenders hurling arrows, spears, and other assorted projectiles down on anyone who enters without an invitation. And after the gates, the path leads steeply uphill to the heart of the citadel. As you make your way up, macaques, black kites, and rose-ringed parakeets seem to be watching your every move. Towards the river are the most beautiful of the pavilions in the complex. The Mughal emperors would greet the sun from here and show themselves to their subjects from the balconies in a ceremony called Jaroka Darshan. The idea was that anyone with a grievance could address the emperor. To the same end, Emperor Jahangir went a step further. He hung a 30-foot gold chain with bells attached down to the river level, where anyone that felt wronged by the emperor's many officials could give the chain a good yank to make his complaints heard. The pavilion with the best view of the Taj Mahal was, for 8 years, the effective prison of Shah Jahan, who had been put there by his son and successor. Aurangzeb was not a particularly nice man. He had his brothers killed and his father imprisoned to secure his claim to the throne. He was a stern expansionist, and while he did not spend much on opulent palaces and grand celebrations as his predecessors had, he did almost bankrupt his country by the incessant warfare that defined his reign. On the way to Jaipur, we stopped at Fatehpur Sikri, the city of victory. Akbar, the third Mughal emperor and the son of Humayun, whose tomb we had visited in Delhi, had founded the city in 1571, and he made it his imperial capital. But it was abandoned relatively soon when Akbar went off fighting in Punjab. By the time his grandson, Shah Jahan, came to power, Fatehpur Sikri had been forgotten. One of the most elaborate stone carvings here is the centerpiece of the Diva-i-Khas, the hall of private audiences. It is a relatively small room with a high ceiling, and in the middle of it stands a pillar that carries an enormous bracketed platform, a platform that can be reached via 4 walkways from the room's sides. The emperor would sit here, and from 4 sides his ministers could approach him to discuss important matters of state with him. The nearby Panch Mahal, a 5-story building that stands out amongst its shorter neighbors, is supported by some 176 columns. Some of the exquisite decorations in this building have survived the centuries surprisingly well. In many places, the intricately carved elephant brackets provide support, and it is not difficult to see how these got their name. Another highlight in Fatehpur Sikri is a building said to have been designed for one of Akbar's Turkish consorts. The stone carvings on this small pavilion are among the finest and best preserved in the entire city. From Fatehpur Sikri, we made our way to Jaipur, where our welcome was quite colorful. Next morning's visit to the fabled Palace of the Winds, or rather its beautifully designed backside, gave us a flavor of the busy street life of Jaipur, the Pink City. With small shops, hawkers, endless streams of motorized vehicles of all shapes and sizes, and the ubiquitous fruit vendors, even early mornings aren't tranquil here. Business starts very early. We went up to the hills outside of Jaipur to visit the Amber Fort. We were now in Rajasthan, the land of kings. And one of these local kings, Raja Man Singh, had built the Amber Fort. And while it is sometimes called the Amber Palace because of its beautiful halls and pavilions inside, it very much looks like a fort when you approach it. Along with a handful of similar citadels in Rajasthan, it became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2013. Getting there required a transfer to a jeep that was able to navigate the worn of steep and narrow alleys leading up to the entrance. From the gate, our legs would carry us further. Through the Sun Gate, you reach the first courtyard, an open space overlooked by the Ganesh Gate. Ganesh is the elephant-headed god, and elephants are everywhere in the decorative details here. From this square, there is a lovely view down to an artificial island in an artificial lake from where the fort got its water. The island is called Kesar Kiari, the Saffron Island. Through the Ganesh Gate, you get to the courtyard where the Jai Mandir is located, a pavilion decorated with hundreds of little mirrors. Here it quickly becomes clear why you would want to call this place a palace instead of a fort. The stone carvings, the frescoes, the lace-like stone screens and the inlay work, along with the manicured gardens, lend a sense of genteel splendor to the palace, or to the place. It is easy to forget about the formidable defense walls, and perhaps that's the entire point of those walls. Local groups of visitors at all of these monuments tend to lend a splash of extra color, with women in beautifully designed saris in every color imaginable. On our way back to Jaipur, we made a brief stop at the Jal Mahal, the water palace that sits in the middle of a lake that was created by damming the Dravyati River. It dates back to the same era as the Amber Fort. We met some great white pelicans there, along with quite a few other birds. Back in Jaipur, it was time to visit the Yantar Mantar Observatory, a collection of some 20 giant sundials and other instruments used to study the heavens with. Horoscopes are still carefully studied in India, for instance when it comes to finding the right spouse. If the horoscopes don't match, many people will decide against exploring the relationship any further. This observatory was constructed under Maharaja Savai Jai Singh II as one of 5 in northern India, and while it is not all that easy to understand completely how these work, getting an idea of just how accurate the sundials can measure the passing of time is very, very impressive. Savai Jai Singh II was a busy man, because around the same time he had the observatory built, he moved the Rajput capital to Jaipur from the Amber Fort. And that is when he built the complex we know today as the City Palace. And that was our next destination. The Jaipur royal family continues to live here along with a small entourage of only 500 servants. But much of the palace is accessible to the public. There are 2 museums, one of which features a beautifully eclectic collection of textiles, and the other showcasing a great variety of weapons in all shapes and sizes. There are some artisan workshops that sell beautiful miniatures of monkeys, kingfishers, and elephants, and galleries, and even a beautiful restaurant. To me, the best part of the complex is the Pritam Nivas Chowk, a courtyard onto which 4 gates open, each of them symbolizing a season and an associated deity. The Peacock Gate represents autumn, and it is dedicated to Lord Vishnu. The Pinkish Lotus Gate is dedicated to Lord Shiva Parvati, and it symbolizes summer. Facing the Lotus Gate is the Rose Gate representing winter, and watched over by the goddess Devi. Finally, the Leheria Gate, its green color representing spring, is topped with a small sculpture of Ganesh, the elephant-headed god who by now had become my favorite Hindu deity. In Jaipur, we also found some time to go beyond the palaces and the monuments. We visited a tiny workshop where teams of men and women produced colorful tie-dyed fabrics without the use of any machinery. The knot tying we were shown was incredibly regular, considering it was all done by hand and feet. We were shown the natural dye still in use in these workshops, and a multicolored scarf displayed just how much complexity can be created with very simple tools. Next, we visited another textile shop where block printing was demonstrated along with weaving. The designs of many of the carpets is surprisingly modern, and the bright colors make them uniquely Indian, because woven into them are shreds of recycled saris. In the evening, we visited with a family that hosted us for a cooking class. We learned about the family's daily life and got a real insight into the secrets of Indian cooking. Thousands of years of trial and error have given the Indian cuisine great confidence in the standard recipes every Indian cook knows. With that comes a deep understanding of the many spices being used, quite liberally in most cases, I might add. Where a non-Indian recipe may suggest a pinch of this and half a teaspoon of that, Indians add spices by the scoop. For us, the result that evening was a home-cooked meal of delicious comfort food. When we said our goodbyes, we could not say namaste enough. Our stay in Jaipur concluded our visit to the Golden Triangle. We then took a flight to get to Guwahati. Not very well known, but Guwahati is the largest city in Assam. And from there, we started our journey along the river, along the Brahmaputra. We could not quite follow the sequence as we would normally do it had we had a river ship. So we did quite a bit by vehicle, by motorized vehicle, and then we also did some of it on this boat that I mentioned earlier, the Indian Geographic Survey. It gave us a really good sense of what the river is like, and thankfully the roads, even in this part of India, are such that you can also travel to some of the sites by road. But I have to say, spending some time on the river really gave us a great sense of what it will be like. This is where river ships often turn around, that is, bid farewell to current guests and welcome a new group. The Brahmaputra River at Guwahati is only about a kilometer wide. That's about 2/3 of a mile. It flows about 430 miles through the state, and along much of its length, it's much wider than here. We took a look around Guwahati and specifically at the temple dedicated to the female deity Kamakya. The complex sits on high hills overlooking Guwahati, and getting there is not all that easy. From where vehicles park, it's a bit of a walk, but thankfully, the temple's pilgrims and the vendors catering to them, selling all kinds of offerings, together make for a bustling streetscape leading up to the temple. Kamakya's temple dates back to the 6th or 7th century, but as is common with Hindu temples, it has been renovated over and over again. For most worshippers, the actual building is less important than the spiritual experience during the visit. There's widespread agreement that a visit to Kamakya's temple leaves a great impression on the devotees, but for the uninitiated it's not easy to follow. Yet even without fully grasping the impact the temple has on its worshippers, a visit is quite a moving experience. The next morning found us traveling east along AH1, Asian Highway 1. The Asian Highway Network is an ambitious UN program to better connect the world, and AH1 is one day going to connect Bulgaria with Tokyo. So somewhere between the old bridge of Svilengrad in Bulgaria, designed by the famous Ottoman architect Sinan, and Tokyo, we stopped at a roadside stand to enjoy the freshest possible coconut milk and to learn about the betel nut snacks locals like to chew on. Apparently it gives you a little high. We decided to pass. We did not pass lunch in a small roadside restaurant. It had a fresh, simple menu, and we tried almost everything from the ever-present dal, lentil dishes, to the sweets that were on offer for dessert. After a while, the scenery along the road became greener and greener, which told us we were getting close to Kaziranga, the national park that is home to more than 2,500 one-horned rhinos, Asian water buffaloes, various deer, and a plethora of birds. Travelers on our ship will sail along the park's edge on the Brahmaputra, but they will also be able to join 2 safaris into the park to spot the wildlife with a little help from local guides to learn about the natural environment and enjoy the scenery, which is spectacular at times. It doesn't take long to find the first rhinos. There are thousands of them, and they're hard to miss. Males can weigh more than 2 tons, and they are, in a word, big. Both males and females grow horns, which are normally about 9 to 10 inches in length. Another magnificent animal that's frequently seen is the endangered Asian water buffalo. There are some 1,400 of them in Kaziranga, so they're not that rare, but they are disappearing in many other parts of the world. One of the threats, interestingly, is that they are crossed with domesticated water buffalo, and then their offspring vanishes from the wild. Common mynas like to hitch rides on water buffalo. They provide a perfect perch from where to spot food, and the large animals' movements stir up the ground on the water under their feet, and with that, the insects the mynas like to eat. There are several species of myna in India, but this one is by far the most widespread. And they aren't picky. They're happy to hitch a ride on a rhino as well. Among the larger animals that can be spotted in the park is also the monitor lizard. This one, to be specific, is the Bengal monitor lizard, and he can be more than 6 feet from head to tail. He's slightly smaller than the Asian water monitor lizard, which also lives in the region. The largest monitor lizards, of course, are found on the southern Indonesian islands, and there we call them Komodo dragons. Most elusive of all animals in Kaziranga is the tiger. Our guides repeatedly instructed us to be alert when they saw an area that was strangely quiet. When there are no macaques playing and water buffalo quietly circle their children, tigers are near. But we never came eye to eye with the striped king of the Indian forest. With no tigers anywhere near, macaques running and jumping from branch to branch, eating little figs and chasing each other are quite a sight, as are the birds that are everywhere, but particularly in the eastern range we visited on our second day in Kaziranga. The eastern side of the park is a bit more open with large expanses of water. In the eastern ranges we also had some up-close encounters with swamp deer. These are a bit bigger than their ubiquitous cousins, the hog deer. Those get their name because from a distance their hindquarters look a little piggish. Speaking of pigs, Kaziranga is also home to wild boar. We saw a family fraternizing with their rhino neighbors. In Kaziranga, the Brahmaputra shapes the landscape with its regular floods, but outside of the monsoon season from June to September, the river is not visible. In Bishwanath Ghat, on the other hand, it is everywhere. Ghat describes a slope towards a river, or a terraced slope, if you will. So where people live near a river, there's almost always a ghat. Where the Brihaganga meets the Brahmaputra, a first temple dedicated to Lord Shiva was erected during the reign of the Gupta dynasty in what is now northern India from the 3rd to the 5th century. What is left of that temple is hidden beneath the waters of the Brahmaputra, but some of the subsequent temples on the same site survive as ruins that can be seen during times of low water. We were there at a time where there was nothing sticking out of the water except for a modern statue of Lord Shiva on a sturdy metal pole. Bishwanath Ghat is a place of great spirituality, and the temples in the older parts of the village are important. As we would see again and again, the importance of a holy place normally has little to do with its size, the quality of the artifacts, or any other things that one might associate with very important places of worship. As we made our way to the temples, we met with some local weavers busy weaving and selling gamosas, red and white and sometimes green scarves that are very popular in this part of Assam. Along the river, people went about their business in ways that had not changed all that much in the last centuries. Because the town's location on a promontory in the river, driftwood washed up all the time, and it is neatly stacked, bundled, and sold directly from the beach here. Washing, fishing, and bathing also take place here, often surprisingly close to each other. AH1, or Highway 175 as it is known here, runs along the southern border of the park, and as we traveled up and down, we enjoyed the very colorful traffic. Children walking to school in crisp white and blue uniforms, elephants ridden by their handlers, pedicabs, trucks, motorcycles, women with baskets on their head getting ready for a day of picking tea leaves. And sharing the road means that lines on the pavement, if there are any, are merely seen as helpful suggestions, not much more. We took to the river one morning with a vessel from the Indian Geographical Survey. The ship wasn't made for passenger transportation, but the plastic tables and chairs were quite comfortable, and we very much enjoyed experiencing the Brahmaputra up close. It is a mighty stream, and is easy to see how entire islands may be scored away in a matter of days or weeks during monsoon season. We were there at the end of the dry season, but the river was a far cry from a small trickle. We were told that the numerous eddies are where one should look for the practically blind Gangetic river dolphin, Flipper's not so attractive cousin. We did see a few, but always just a fin or a flipper, and always just for a second or two. We passed one of the many islands in the river, and to our surprise an elephant was strolling along on it. As we contemplated that elephants really are excellent swimmers, we heard an unmistakable roar on the southern shore of the river, and we turned our heads just in time to see a big, wet elephant join her herd after a refreshing swim. All along the river, we encountered a wide variety of watercraft. Fishermen, commuters, and shipbuilders could be seen going about their business all along the river. Our destination for the day was Majuli Island, by many accounts the world's largest river island, where a rather unique culture had emerged over the centuries. Majuli may get linked to the mainland by a bridge, which has been under construction for quite a while now. It may be some time before it is finished, and that might not be a bad thing for the uniqueness of the island. It is easy to see how such a highway into Majuli could radically change daily life. Routines in many of the small communities on Majuli are focused on the monasteries of the island, the satras. We visited 3 of them, each with their own particular way of worship. The first satra we visited was the Sri Sri Uttar Kamalabari monastery, where monks as young as 6 or 7 years old began their monastic life. These boys came from local families, and they often spent time at home as well as in the monastery. We attended a Gayan Bayan performance. Gayan refers to the singing or chanting, while Bayan refers to the accompanying music of the khol and the tal, the drum and the cymbal. The murals around us chronicle the life of Lord Vishnu, the preserver. In the Trimurti, the Holy Trinity in Hinduism, if you will, Brahma is the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer, or the change maker. Vishnu is very central to the particular kind of Hinduism that is practiced and preached in the Majuli monasteries. This is also true for the second satra we visited, Auniyati, which is mainly known for the fact that it has a number of rather old relics, among them a fierce-looking Garuda. My favorite satra was Samaguri, where we got to meet an artisan who creates the masks for the Bahunas, the masked dances which are also a form of worship on the island. Bamboo frames are covered with paper, cow dung, cotton cloth, jute, and other materials, and then painted in bright colors. Each step takes a considerable amount of time, and this satra is essentially a workshop that delivers masks to all the other monasteries on the island. We also visited a small home on Majuli, built on stilts as much of the island is prone to monsoon flooding. Here a young woman about to get married was weaving gamozas, her contribution to the wedding ceremony. Her mother showed us how she creates the pots that are fired in kilns next to the road to her house. We had another stop along the river before we would leave the Brahmaputra to visit Sivasagar the next day, to see a jute factory. Jute is made from a plant that thrives on the banks of the river, and the factory is one of the largest in Assam. It was in Silgat, a community on the south shore of the river. From the drying of the grass to the processing of the fibers into threads and the weaving, we witnessed every step of the industrial process, watching a small army of men working with huge specialized machines. We also did manage to visit a tea plantation as we traveled on away from the river. Only the top leaves of the plant are picked for tea, and that means that the shrubs always maintain this perfectly sheared appearance. Cutting encourages new growth, and the new tender leaves are still picked by hand. In Sivasagar, we visited the ruins of what was the proud capital of the Kingdom of Ahom, which ruled this corner of India from 1228 to 1826, almost 600 years. Despite several attempts, the Mughal emperors that ruled so much of India never were able to subdue the Ahoms, and there's great local pride in this, even today. As we moved ever further east through the province, it was clear that the roots of many Assamese were in Southeast Asia, and that there were subtle shifts in the culture, even today, that came with that. Whereas eating beef in much of India is largely taboo, for instance, this is not necessarily so in Assam. We first visited the Talalal Gar, a fortified palace dating back to the 18th century. It is a great place to wander around and get lost a little bit. There are stairs, dark corridors, tunnels even, as well as airy rooms with beautiful views. The humid climate has not been kind to the ruins, and the fine decorations of many of the rooms can only be seen as fragments in a few places. The Rangar was a stadium of sorts, a large building like an ancient skybox maybe, from where royals and nobles could watch public sport matches and games. A few rather colorful fiberglass sculptures provide an idea of what these matches were like. Finally, we visited an area that holds 3 temples overlooking a large tank, an artificial water basin the Ahom rulers had built for easily accessible water. The largest of the 3, Shiva doll, is covered in large stone-carved panels, many of which have survived quite well. After we said goodbye to the river in the Matigat, we slowly but surely started to go our separate ways. The first of us had to stay in Kolkata to check out the shipyard where the ship is being built. 2 of us left for Kochi in the southwest. Kochi and the Kerala backwaters are part of an extension that you could book at the end of your voyage. And after that, I had one more stop to make before we went all back home. A day of travel brought us halfway across the country to the southern city of Kochi, or Cochin. As a port city, Cochin has been open to the world throughout its history, and this is evident in many places. To begin with, its harbor, largely shaped by Robert Bristow, a British engineer who did much to improve the port facilities that allowed Cochin to become such an important port as it is to this very day. Earlier European influences had come from the Portuguese and the Dutch, while Cochin's famous fishing nets are said to be brought here even earlier by Zheng He, a fabled 14th century Chinese admiral, explorer, and diplomat. With its banyan trees, its shaded squares, and colonial architecture, Kochi's old city is very popular with visitors, and it is not hard to see why this would be so. During an evening stroll, since the opportunity arose, we decided to see if we could learn how to lower and raise the large fishing nets. The exercise turned out to just be a demonstration. We did not come home with any fish. We attended a katakali performance, complete with an explanation without which we would have missed more than half of the action. Katakali works very much with standardized storytelling, and anyone who has seen it before understands how things will end, but for a novice the explanations make the entire performance much more enjoyable and accessible than it otherwise would. The next day we were off to the backwaters of Kerala, but not before we made a quick stop at the truck parking lot to marvel at the beautifully decorated trucks that Cochin is rightly proud of. Throughout India, trucks are almost always painted in bright colors, but these were hands down the best. On our way back to Cochin, we stopped at an unusual site in India, a Christian church. Certainly the first such house of worship I have entered, where it was obligatory to take off one's shoes. In Cochin itself, we had had a similarly interesting experience, something that would only happen in India. In the local synagogue, which is as much a museum as a house of worship today, we met a group of young Muslim men with their teachers who found two tall Westerners quite fascinating. Enough to ask if we could take a picture all together. And so we did, a group of Muslim boys, a devout Hindu, a Protestant, and a Catholic, in a synagogue. And then after Cochin, Klaus went to Mumbai, because that is part of the same extension that Cochin is part of, and I traveled further north to Nepal, to the capital city of Kathmandu, because that is a second extension that we're putting together. And I spent almost 4 days there. It was a joy. I started my first day with a special treat. I was met in my hotel by a young man whose last name gave away his profession. Tashi Sherpa's clan climbed mountains. Originally by necessity, and ever since Edmund Hillary ascended Mount Everest, as a profession. Tasha brought me to the airport for a flight to get closer to the roof of the world. With all the aisle seats empty, the small Yeti Airlines aircraft was basically converted into a sightseeing plane, and flight attendants, while they did hand out water in bottles, were mainly there to point out the peaks that were gliding by. I didn't expect the flight to be as impressive as it turned out. Perhaps I expected something akin to the Swiss Alps. I have flown over them numerous times, but the Himalayas are something quite different. With its summit barely visible through the clouds, Mount Everest was a sight to behold. Back on the ground, Tashi suggested I meet his cousin, another Sherpa, and of course I said yes, why not? Seconds later, I had my picture taken with her. It turned out that another Sherpa had flown the plane. I spent the day exploring the old city, starting with the Pashupatinath temple precinct through which the Bagmati River ran, or a creek at the time I visited. Worshippers have been coming here for 24 centuries, and the complex is one of the most important sites of Hinduism in the world. While the main temple is not accessible to non-Hindus, it hardly seems to matter to visitors, because there's so much to take in with all the senses that it is quite overwhelming as it is. Rows of temples, monkeys lurking everywhere, holy men clad in orange, funerary pyres, offerings of flowers in colorful pigment, and the saris of the women. Just below the temple, on terraces laid out along the river, families of the deceased are busy with ritual cremations that take place here, with the ashes sent downstream with the river. More than 500 individual temples can be counted in the area, some monumental and others very, very modest. Not far from here, in a bustling part of Kathmandu, stands the Bunadat Stupa, one of the largest such structures in the world. For centuries, people moved across the Himalayas from north to south, and this is how Tibetan Buddhism made its way into Nepal. There are not many places in the world where you can see the two great Eastern religions practiced side by side and with such devotion. The eyes on the stupa symbolize the Buddha's all-seeing wisdom. I spent the evening in a traditional restaurant where the food was accompanied by surprisingly raucous music and traditional dances. It all conveyed a sense of joy I was surprised to find here, perhaps simply because I thought life would always be hard and difficult in this land of high mountains and thin air. In that respect, the Kathmandu Valley was a revelation and a surprise. My final day in Nepal was spent visiting Bhaktapur and Patan. Today they are almost suburbs of Kathmandu, but they were once towns of considerable importance in their own right, and both had the temples to show for it. I first visited Bhaktapur. This city was probably founded in the 13th century by a people called Nevar, and many of today's residents still consider themselves Nevar. In 1769 it was incorporated in the Greater Gorkha Kingdom, the precursor of Nepal, and because that left it somewhat insular and insulated, it was, if you will, frozen in time. Because the Kathmandu Valley lies on a fault line, Bhaktapur has lived through at least 2 big earthquakes that have done a lot of damage, and restoration of the royal palace and the many temples seems to be an ongoing project. Thanks to a considerable amount of foreign aid, it has largely kept its medieval character, and I found it to be one of the most beautiful small cities I have visited. The town of Patan is not as well preserved, but it has a beautiful palace and several outstanding buildings surrounding it, so it can be forgiving for looking a bit of a mishmash between old and new. The wood carving in the former royal palace, along with the stone carving and the metalwork, made each of the courtyards an incredible feast for the eyes. It would be easy to spend hours here studying each minute detail because all of it has been done with such attention to detail and such precision. In the end, I would be hard-pressed to pick one old city over the other. I do think that for anyone traveling to Nepal, both are absolute must-sees. That night after dinner with my very friendly host, I had to pack my bags, stuffing in a few books, a hand-painted tanka depicting the Buddha's Wheel of Life, and more than 2 weeks of memories into my suitcase. And I think I will certainly be back. That was it. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm signing off. We're all looking forward to welcoming you on board the Viking Brahmaputra in 2027. See you then.